In this interview, I'm going to be talking to Mike Brock. He is an American engineer and former tech executive turned philosopher. And he writes the Substack Notes from the Circus, all about American politics and issues. So, welcome to the interview, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
Look, I'm a big fan of yours, and you told me off camera that we're actually born in Canada and a dual citizen. So, congratulations. You
Thank
know,
you.
it automatically puts you up a notch in my audience estimation. Um, I really like your Substack because you deal with issues that I think your logic appeals to me. It speaks to me. And the first one we're going to talk about is last defenders of a dead faith. Give me your kind of an overview of your argument, if you don't mind.
Well, I mean, that piece I think deals with, my description of this remnant within, American elite, the American elite establishment, and maybe throughout the broader West, quite frankly, because we should talk about how this is really a global problem, not just contained to the machinations of American politics. But there's there is a element in American political society and the global society that another philosopher friend of mine, Vlad Vexler, um, refers to as like hyper neoliberalism. And I want to be like careful about the way that like this gets framed, because like I'm not actually like really I'm not a leftist. I defend a very like liberal position. um I believe we should have a capitalist economy. But I also believe that we should have a social safety net and democratically controlled institutions and regulated markets. But there's an element that comes out of this, as you say, the 1980s. I don't know if you said that on camera or off camera. um, just for your audience's context. Um, Around this idea that the more we give the market, the more power we give the market to do the things that the market is good at, which is allocating scarce resources, and driving innovation through competition, all these things that people who glorify the market talk about, right? The sort of the Milton Friedmans of the world, and that that there's truth to that, right? But there's also this notion that the government is good at nothing, so we should privatize everything. The government standing in the way of entrepreneurial markets is ultimately this like attack on like human freedom. And this is a sort of like an ideological sort of kernel upon which like this entire like movement, particularly really associated with the center right, but also on the center left, um, holds on to as this sort of like sacred understanding. And in the Last Defenders of the Dead Faith, I'm really taking account of the fact that this argument of what you can call market maximalism, hyper neoliberalism, maybe just neoliberalism, or like Randian, uh, Randian love of sort of like of the market above all. Um, I think it is obviously not a principle upon which we can build a fair and just society around on its own. That government clearly is a necessary element for provisioning public goods, for regulating those markets, making sure those markets are not corrupt, taking advantage of consumers, not polluting the planet, not engaging in things that have social, economic, I already mentioned, environmental externalities, and engaging in in legislation and regulation to contain and constrain those markets. And then, getting even more just sort of basic, like also understanding that those markets exist because of the institutional foundations of property rights that the law and order that our democratic liberal societies establish for these markets, which to operate, um, are a intractable part of. So my that's like my that's the what I'm talking about in that piece, and I'm observing that a large portion of the elite, I would even maybe have considered myself maybe a part of this, right? 3 or 4 years ago, that just holds on to this notion that anything we do to sort of constrain the market is simply misguided. It's simply uh, it, it's causing all these like unseen like horrors, right? Like Bastiat, Henry Hazlitt, the things that all the libertarians like to trot out to sort of like get you to sort of see the errors of your ways if you advance this notion that governments should regulate and control markets. Um, it's bullshit. We see this. People see this. People are angry. People see the wealth disparity. They see the wealth porn on TikTok and Instagram. And that system has lost its sense of legitimacy and it's breaking down. And until liberals and pro-democracy forces are able to really contend with that and have that conversation in an honest way, um, I don't think we're going to be able to build the broad multi-ideological coalition that's necessary to push back against this rising fascist threat. That's what I'm talking about in that essay.
Let me sum up your argument for you. Here's what appealed to me. Your argument is essentially that the Gilded Age was started in the 1870s and was dominated
Yeah.
by the
Yeah.
tycoons, the robber barons like
Yeah.
John Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie.
Yep.
All of that extended actually right into the end of the 1920s, and it
Yeah.
was their greed, their inability to restrain their need for wealth accumulation that essentially brought us into the 1930s, and the
Yeah.
American system was on the verge of collapse. And what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did when he came in 1932 and implemented the New Deal in 1933 is he put constraints on there and he persuaded that system, the wealthy in the United States, to accept democratic constraints on wealth accumulation.
Mhm.
It basically saved the system. And and then what we have now, and then that system worked for like 80, 90 years. For a long time, it was the basis of
Mhm.
world trade for
Yeah.
crying out loud. But it's now history is rhyming, and now we have oligarchs and bro-ligarchs, of which maybe you rub shoulders with them in California,
Know
and
quite a few of
we're
them
going
personally.
and we're going through the same thing. It's the same process where the oligarchs like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the whole crew they're systematic, they're supporting politicians and who systematically are dismantling democratic constraints on their wealth accumulation. And now what we're seeing is the same kind of wealth inequality, same kind of tensions we saw that led into the Great Depression. And they refuse to compromise. And Trump is certainly not the president. I mean, he's aiding and abetting them. So if an FDR doesn't come out of the woodwork soon, the system's going to tear itself apart.
Well, I mean, I think the system has already, in many ways, torn itself apart. I think we are in a moment of, like I say, we're in a moment of collapse. I mean that literally, like moral, political collapse. We can talk about that. But yeah, I mean, these oligarchic interests are, I mean, I mean, And you're right. I have rubbed shoulders with these people, and I know some of these people personally, and I've broken many friendships over the things that I'm talking to you now about. Um, but yeah, I mean FDR, right? Yeah, I mean FDR was the liberal answer to the revolutionary conditions at the time, right? I mean, America was, and the rest of the world, rest of the Western world, right? I mean, the was filled with pre-revolutionary fervor. I mean, that culminated in the rise of fascism in Europe, communism, Bolshevism in Russia, and in America, right, with Roosevelt, right, there was a sort of a recognition, a sort of a liberal recognition that there had to be some liberal answer for the social and economic forces that were pulling the civilization asunder at the time. And that was, of course, as you said, at the FDR and the New Deal, which was brought in, in the midst of the Great Depression. Um, and that after the Second World War, became sort of the institutional foundation for this sort of like, this the kind of almost like not almost an unprecedented period of increasing prosperity in human history, after the end of the Second World War, and sort of the rise of the especially the rise of the Pax Americana, and after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Um, th- this 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 is something that, yes, I mean, people have definitely lost perspective on this notion that unrestrained capitalism can't is must be protected at all costs. That anything less than that is like, you're is socialist Venezuela. Is an insane notion. Like, this isn't true. The stability of the capitalist system that we saw over the last more than half century was a result of the ethical and democratic oversight of that system, the regulatory regimes, the forced transparency, like through like securities laws and legislations that make it so, if you're going to like operate in public markets, you have to show transparency, you have to show your books, you have to follow certain accounting rules and principles that like protect shareholders. I mean, all of these things led to, the most prosperous period in human history. And it was regulated, and there was all these laws that these companies had to comply with and had to work within in order to do business. And you know what? Like, we were all better for it, because we see what happens when those restraints are taken away. We've seen the results of underregulation. The 2008 financial crisis was a devastating reminder of what happens when markets are able to operate in the darkness without oversight, without democratic oversight, without transparency. And we're now seeing it again. It's playing out in real time. We're seeing it with this crypto, with these crypto markets. We're going to see more. I mean, it's happening like in the Oval Office, like right now. I mean, uh, this is the makings of revolutionary conditions. And that's scary, especially at this moment in history, in our place in scientific and technological civilization.
One of the reasons I'm interested in this is when I was going to university in from 79 to 86, I was the University of Saskatchewan, which probably means nothing to you, but it's a reasonably well respected university in the middle of the country. And it had expanded in the 60s and attracted a lot of American professors. And these were folks from, I remember a bunch of them were from New York, and they came imbued with FDR liberal values.
Hmm.
And we would, I was a history major, so we would, be studying Latin American history, U.S. history, whatever it was. And looking back on it, those values were front and center, and FDR was a hero to them. And so and then, that was also the time of the rise of Milton Friedman and then Ronald Reagan embodying those values and principles in his policies. My point here is that FDR was the antidote. He was the medicine that saved the system. This time, the system has basically embraced the disease in the form of
Yeah.
Trump. And they're
Well,
and
the
oh,
nuance,
hang
the
on a second.
nuance I would,
Let me finish
okay.
the thought. Let me finish the thought. Not only has it embraced the disease, but there doesn't appear to be a champion on the horizon. The Democratic Party
Yeah.
is in disarray. Gavin Newsom is the closest thing to any kind of a champion. And so there may not be a brake to be applied to this runaway train.
Well, we could talk about that. I mean, I have a different perspective on that. Well, the nuance I will say though is, I mean, some of Milton Friedman's and Reagan's critiques of the New Deal were valid, right? I mean, some of the New Deal infrastructure, some stuff long gone. Perfect example, the National Recovery Administration, which fixed prices on everything from sort of haircuts to laundry detergent, led to unnecessary chronic shortages. We know that we shouldn't do things like that anymore. Like no economists think that's a good idea. Um, so I mean, there was overreach in the New Deal, and I like share a lot of the kind of conservative critiques of that. But that there was overreach doesn't mean that the project sort of like on average was a good thing. I think the New Deal on average was a good thing. It was the establishment of what, some people now kind of call democratic capitalism, right? Sort of, which is sort of, associated with sort of like Elizabeth Warren type, um, like approaches to sort of thinking about this. And so, yeah, I think that like general notion saved capitalism from itself. And we should be able to hold two thoughts in our heads at once, right? That like that, the Gilded Age was runaway corruption and a complete subduing of the rule of law and what should be, the supremacy of self constitutional self rule. Um, and on the other hand, like recognizing that like when you address problems, sometimes you get things wrong, sometimes you go too far, and that shows up in sort of these like critiques in this the neoliberal moment in the 1980s, and they weren't wrong about everything, right? And we can see those things. With and but they were wrong about a lot, and they were wrong about a lot of things, like from everything from China, like bringing China into the World Trade Organization, to the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1997, which formed the seeds of the collapse of the financial system 11 years later. So I think that like one and this sort of attempt to sort of synergize these things is sort of showing up in the conversation in a healthy way, right? This abundance agenda, as sort of associated, with Ezra Klein and his co-author. I think it is an attempt to sort of like fuse to hold these two notions in your head at once, in broad strokes. But to this point you made about this being a sort of a runaway situation, I'm a little bit more optimistic than that. I think that, as I said, I think we're entering a moment that has what I would call like sort of like pre-revolutionary qualities, not just in the United States, but across the West. That's been building for some time. MAGA is part of that, actually, right? So it's not you would expect to sort of see um, attempts to sort of like challenge the power vacuum created by um, sort of the decreased and perceived legitimacy of institutions, coming from both the left and the right. So we're now in a moment now where the primary political insurgency against the sort of like New Deal regime that you and I both grew up in, is has largely been manifest from the right. But we're starting to see the left wing and the centrist reactions to that, and I expect one of the things we're going to see is politics is going to get far more rough and tumble than most people expect. You mentioned Gavin Newsom. Like you, I mean, I have pretty critical. I'm here in California. You can see my California Republic flag right behind me here. And I have my own critiques of Newsom, but I will say that since the his sort of change of posture to a more oppositional one towards Trump, I've been impressed with his sort of approach to resisting him. In particular, his challenge to Texas, that he'll gerrymander California if Texas gerrymanders, which I wrote a piece on that yesterday. I approve of that threat, and I think he should follow through on that threat if necessary. And I expect you're going to see more of that, and the stakes are going to keep rising because both sides of the aisle don't trust the institutions, and this is something that everyone has to understand. The world that you and I grew up in is gone. It's gone. I mean, it's dead as a rock, and trying to reanimate it is only likely to create Frankenstein's monster at this point. So the question is like, what do we do to sort of recover, the core features of our society, which is that we're a self-governing constitutional republic, that should be a democratic form of government, and build a vision that can hold enough of the American public within it, a multi-ideological coalition of Americans that spans everyone from progressives to conservatives, that they can at least agree on a few things that allows us to have, productive competition within grander cooperation. That's what I'm focused on at my blog on Notes from the Circus. I'm trying to make an argument for what can contain that kind of conversation. But I think where I'm not where I'm more optimistic now is that I do think that while this is a real fascist insurgency, it's a real fascist insurgency, and we should talk about that. They are now they are not they're not exactly speed running anymore. The institutional pushback is real. The pushback in the streets is real. The cultural pushback is only going to become more intense from here, and that's where things are going to get really dangerous.
Maybe this is a message to your audience, your American audience, but Canada is taking the mum's maxim approach to this. Hope
Mhm.
for the best, but plan for the worst. Now,
Yeah,
we've been
that's
good
right.
neighbors. We've been good neighbors to you guys for almost 160 years, and we love you dearly, but we're done with you. And
Yeah,
our prime minister has said that we're done. There will be no deepening of the integration between the Canadian economies and other regulatory systems and so on. It's finished. We're now going to be looking to Asia. We're going to be looking to Europe. He's already negotiated some additional deals with Europe. That's our new focus. And because while you may be hopeful, and we would love to be hopeful for you, we really don't think that. We're much more pessimistic, and we think that the fascist tendency, the fascist government that you have now, I'll adopt your language, is going to do so much damage in the next 3.5 years that it may
be a lot.
extend, and there may be damage done you can't come back from, and it may whatever emerges out of that flaming dumpster fire that is currently and turning into a bigger fire, tire fire, uh, we don't want anything to do with it. And we are genuinely worried about MAGA drifting across the border as trends
Mhm.
tend to do. We've already got what we call
Yeah.
Maple MAGA. And so while I appreciate the fact that there's pushback and there are forces that are countering the MAGA and Trump and so on, we haven't got the patience for it. We're going to protect our own, protect our
Mhm.
version of the New Deal, our administrative state, our welfare state, and we're going in a different direction. And that may be the biggest or one of the biggest fallouts from what the United States is going through, because you're going to lose friends and
Yeah.
you're going to lose
Well,
allies.
yeah. Obvious. I would hope, and I think, and actually, I think for pro-democratic forces in the United States, we don't want. I like the fact that Canada is standing up to America. I want our allies to give us a hard time. I want. I mean, in fact, like if one thing that makes me really angry, is to see obsequiousness in other countries. That, like, I don't want other countries to take a knee to Mr. Trump any more than I want, like, any more than I want any citizen of this country to take a knee. We have no kings here, and I certainly don't want any other world leaders treating him as such either. Surely, like any responsible American takes responsibility for their country. I take responsibility for the country that I'm a citizen of and that I've chosen to fight for. Um, and that taking responsibility for it means that, like, even though I didn't vote for Donald Trump, even though I will never support that man, I will do everything I can to stand in his way. Um, I don't. I was simply not. I wouldn't ask that, like, people like forgive America, and forgive the collective responsibility that the body politic has over its government. If a country is to be governed by itself, right? In this sort of Madisonian form of government that we have, then we should take we take total moral responsibility for the conduct of our country. I don't shy away from the shame that you're directing towards the country.
That's not shame, it's anger. I think
Well,
we really need, we
I think
are,
you should I hope you would shame us, right?
I'm happy to do that if you want.
Yeah, that would be
But
great. I mean, it's good.
but what I was trying to communicate was anger,
Virtue.
because we're pissed off. We really are
Yeah.
pissed off. And I don't think Americans understand. I mean, this talk about annexing Canada as the 51st state, as if, our opinion doesn't matter, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I want to get beyond that because you wrote a piece today, came out today, Why
Yeah.
I Call It Fascism. And this is a very important argument because we've been having this up in Canada for a while. What is it? Is it a libertarian populism? Is it authoritarian libertarianism? On and on and on. And you just said, forget it. It fits the classical definition of fascism. Call a spade a shovel and let's get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has all the important qualities of the sort of the what we saw. Um, in Italian fascism and early Nazi fascism in Germany. I think, a lot of people get their, hands all up in the air because they think of fascism as being, like, specifically, like, associated with like particular, like, imagery and particular historical events like the Holocaust. Um, but I would say that it has all the important features that one would consider when trying to say, like, is this it has the um, I mean it has the sort of the oligarchic sort of collaboration with the state, the sort of the merger of, like, state and public power. It has the features of sort of like using scapegoating, the sort of the othering, like what we're the like secret police, like the complete demolition of any sort of like attempt, or at least attempted demolition of an independent free press, the in, you know it, the educational intellectual institutions being brought to heel and trying to and brought under ideological control, sort of a cultural aesthetic movement. It's at some point, right? I mean, there are some people who make arguments that I respect against calling it fascism, but they don't they make those arguments strategically as opposed to sort of like on a sort of a strict definitional basis. Like some people that I like deeply respect very much disagree with me calling it fascism, not because they don't think it's like, it's a defensible stance, but but they take a position that's sort of related to human psychology that I just don't instinctually share, which is that if you call it fascism, you run the risk of scaring people, and that will make it less likely for them to sort of resist what's happening. They'll become more scared. They'll be more likely to self-censor themselves. I have more faith in Americans than that. I think that Americans are rowdy people and they don't really like fucking being told what to do. I mean, COVID was an example of that. I mean, as like even here in like Los Angeles, like, during COVID, like during the lockdowns, I mean, just like the amount of just like people just like not giving a shit about what the government told them to do is just like very palpable in America. So there is this sort of, I think, kind of like rebellious spirit that sort of just exists here, and anyone who sort of spent any time in America can kind of like knows that that's there. And so I think Americans have their limits, and you're already seeing that happening, right? Americans went from having a majority support for these mass deportations to now being like, this is, I don't agree with. Like, you actually had like something like in the 70% now of people saying, actually, I don't agree with this. Like, so I think Americans, I don't think of, I think calling it fascism is what I like to say, calling something by its proper name, like, which is, I think very much in sort of the intellectual spirit of Hannah Arendt or George Orwell, and really insisting on using the language that is accurate rather than beating around the bush and allowing people to sort of use strategic nuance to avoid recognizing like something for what it is. Because if you want people to sort of understand the threat, then call the threat what it is. Don't. It's much better to use a word, a singular word that conveys a dense definition that represents reality than 65 paragraphs of deep nuance.
Look, couldn't agree more. And we're grappling with an issue that you probably grappled with during Trump 1.0 in Alberta, which is it's the Texas of Canada. It's where the oil and gas industry is headquarters, very wealthy, and it has a premier who Danielle
The
Smith.
Athabascan oil sands.
Yes. And so we had a premier who calls herself a libertarian populist and is dismantling a lot of the sort of the welfare state that all Canadian provinces participate in. And the oil industry, she was an oil and gas lobbyist before she became premier. And my point here is that she is moving in the direction towards this what we're calling fascism, but she's not there yet. She's kind of where Trump was in Trump, 2016 to 2020. But it's a useful now to have that you frame this narrative this way or this debate this way because we can see what's coming, and so we can learn perhaps from what the United States is going through, and say maybe put some brakes on because it's Canadians. Canadians are not quite as rowdy as Americans are, and tend to probably we trust government a little bit more. And I think in this case, the politician in Alberta, Danielle Smith, is taking advantage of it. Anyway, this is very troubling, and I think you've done an excellent job of reframing this. I like it. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I will say this is not a uniquely American problem. It's a structural and economic structural problem that is not going away. I mean, fascism is rising in Europe too, right? I mean, there are substantial fascist movements in France and in Germany. I mean, they won the Austrian like parliamentary elections, which like led to a really weird like throwing out of the election and holding of a re-election last year, which I mean, is obviously something we can't get into. I mean, the sort of the historically Nazi like affiliated party in Sweden is the official opposition. So I mean, we shouldn't like underplay the threat outside the United States. These cultural forces, this disillusionment, this sense that like people can't touch politics, that they don't understand what's going on in like corporate boardrooms, and they don't understand how policies are made and what central banks do, and like who sets mortgage rates, and like what the hell's going. I mean, this is like a deep problem that has led to like deep distrust among people who feel like they're never going to be able to own a home. They saw their prices going up like mad after COVID, and they were told that it was going to be temporary, and it wasn't, and the prices never went down. And this is like a problem that liberal and other left-wing politicians across the Western world have to figure out a way to address, because the problem's only going to get worse, especially with like AI now and the disinformation that's going to come out of that, and the attempts to cynically weaponize that distrust in government across the Western world. That is actually the real problem, that we have to kind of keep our eye on the ball, even as we now have to go and put out these fires that are already burning. Trump is a fire that's burning, and so are, in the Republican Party is a fire that's burning. It sounds like you have a fire that's like started there, right? With Danielle. I've spoken to Danielle Smith, by the way, personally, maybe about like 15 years ago or something. Just and I have like some mutual friends that know her. I called her out actually quite viciously on Notes from the Circus when she went and basically took a knee for Trump at Mar-a-Lago during the transition period. But so I mean, and so yeah, I mean that's something that I think like, people need to really understand. This is not a uniquely American phenomenon. It started a long time ago. We saw it with Brexit, the first election of Trump, with Viktor Orban and his Fidesz party in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, Modi in India, and honestly, quite frankly, in sort of a left wing form with Scheinbaum in Mexico. This like I mean this is Japan right now too. The sort of the right wing populist party is like leading in the polls there. Like this is a global phenomenon, and it needs and there is a risk of like overemphasizing Trump in people's minds, even though he's kind of the proximate threat, especially for me as an American.
Yeah, I get it. And we're drawing parallels all the time between Trump and some of the politicians we have in Canada. Uh, Mike, this has been fascinating. Thank you very much for this. I would advise, everybody who is interested, go to Mike's Substack and support him and subscribe. It's always an
Thank you.
interesting read. So thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks for having me.